Hi, I'm Civil Defense Engineer. I made a video on how to make a repeater out of two Baofeng radios. And from all the comments on that video, I think it needs a bit of an update. So some of the comments were good, some of them were bad, and there were a lot of people that were dubious about this setup because they haven't had a very good experience with it in the past. And I think a lot of this frustration is stemming from a misunderstanding about how to deploy this type of radio. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate in this video. But is this an actual repeater? Or are the haters online onto something here? Let me show you what they have in mind when they talk about a so-called real repeater. So this is a block diagram of what your typical repeater might look like. And if you watched my build video, you may already spot some of the main differences. For instance, it has a single antenna that both the radios are connected to through the filtering duplexer in the middle there. And here I must point out that a lot of people took issue with my referring to the relay box that connected the two Baofengs as a duplexer, and I'll own that. That component is more like the yellow box below on this diagram, which is variously referred to as the controller, the patch, or the relay. The duplexer, on the other hand, is a two-way filter that only lets a very narrow frequency band pass through the transmitter to the antenna, and from the antenna to the receiver. That way, the RF energy of the transmitter doesn't drown out or desensitize the receiver. So why didn't I include one in my build? Well, here are a couple examples of some bulky cavity filters that you might see on a big standalone permanent repeater. Those on the left there, they're not small, nor are they cheap. I think the one in the middle there was running about $1,500, and it was repurposed from some EMA repeater, tooled down to ham frequencies. Now, the one on the right might work for a lunchbox repeater, and I saw they run about $40 over at Gigaparts. This one only does crossband. I don't know how well they work, but I might pick one up and run a comparison with the dual antenna layout. So that's how real repeaters work. Now you can see that the one I built uses the two radios separately on their own antennae. So in this situation, when you bring the two antennae right next to each other, the RF energy from the transmitter is beamed directly into the receive antenna. So let's talk about that. Now this is a typical radiation pattern of an omnidirectional antenna. Looks kind of like a donut there. So it's radiating out equally in all directions on the azimuth plane. And as you increase elevation, it is actually decreasing in intensity until it tapers off to almost nothing along the axis of the antenna. When you have two antennae right next to each other, it's blasting the energy right into the other one. Now, even if it's operating on a different frequency, it's still energizing that antenna. If they're vastly different frequencies, it's not going to be as big of a deal because it's listening on different frequency, and so it's not going to affect it quite so much. But when they're right next to each other, it can still affect it. Now, to fix this, what you can do is isolate these two antennae by moving them vertically off the same plane. Now, there's some debate about how much vertical distance you need, but it's got to be at least a few feet, but probably as much as like 20 or 30 feet. Now, the coax extension cables I had on my box only allowed for about 4 or 5 feet. But if you're worried about it, you can get longer extension cords. Also, the relay box itself has cables coming off of it before it hits the radio. So if it's not all together in one box, you can have the transmit antenna, the box, and then the receive antenna all on one string thrown up into a tree. And that's how you want to go about mounting this thing, by getting a line as high up into a tree as possible and use the highest elevation you have access to. Because remember, that's the whole point of having a repeater in the first place, especially when it's not increasing the power by any meaningful amount, is getting around that line of sight limitation. So if you don't have topography, you might not even want to consider making this type of repeater. It's more hassle than it's worth, and you'd be better off using simplex. So as long as you are spacing those antennae vertically and you have a high elevation that you're mounted on, you can get miles of range on this thing. There's my repeater out there hanging up in a tree. Alright, so this is about the maximum range I was able to get. 9 and some miles here, and still have a bit of a tone there. You can audibly discern it. Now, I did signal for a little bit as I was driving out, went down into a valley, then came up on the other side. That's where I was able to get the maximum range. Then it proceeded down on the other side and it dropped out completely. So there's actually a handy tool you can use online to estimate line of sight based on your current elevation. I'll try and link that below if I think of it. And yeah, so this is on crossband mode, and that works the best for this. I did also try it on UHF and VHF only. UHF kind of worked. It dropped out at about 2.5 miles. VHF hardly worked. It didn't even get out to a mile before it dropped out. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense because VHF, the wavelength is close to the vertical separation, so it's harder to get the isolation between the transmit and receive antenna. Unless you like really space it out, got an extra long coax extension, but then one of your two antennae is going to be really close to the ground and you're not going to get that height advantage on one of them. So that could work though if you're on a slope facing a valley. You can even just lay out the coax along the slope with one antenna at the top, one antenna at the bottom. You could probably get coverage on the whole valley. But I don't have that topography readily accessible around here. Yeah, I'd call this a success. You could follow my footsteps if you want, or you can get an off-the-shelf crossband repeater, or you can build one of the so-called real repeaters with all of the amplifier, duplex filtering, and backup power system you want. And you can spend as much money as you want. It might not be a man-portable thing you bring out into the field and when you set up a base station somewhere. So yeah, I'd call this a success, if I do say so myself. But I readily admit there's probably way better ways of accomplishing this. It's just one way I found that works, and it was fun to do. So I got to address some of the comments on that last video. The first one that I saw quite often was $20, more like $200. Sure, if you count the way I kitted it out with the waterproof box, the battery backup, the higher gain antenna, all of that. If you're counting the cost of the radios themselves, it can add up, but you know, that's part of the fun of building something yourself, is kitting it out in a cool way. But I guess my point in that video title was that if you have two Baofengs laying around, which who doesn't have a drawer full of Baofengs watching this channel anyway, then a simple $18 component can turn them into a rudimentary repeater. And I saw a lot of Baofeng hate. Baofengs don't work. Baofeng repeaters will never work. You only get 100 feet of range. And all right, I've already shown you how they can work. And show me on the doll where the Baofeng hurt you. It's true that in the past, Baofengs tended to have that kind of dirty transmission, but that has not been an issue for a long time. And I've personally tested every single one of my Baofengs. They are just as clean as my Yaesu radio. I don't know, people will be hating on Baofengs to the end of time. And you know, I don't like that they're made in China either, and El Cheapo stuff, but I think it's and this is a problem with the US military too. They need a lot of cheap, attritable hardware rather than a few all-up rounds that cost $20 million each or whatever, you know? Somebody suggested getting a solar charger. That's a great idea, especially if you're just going to be leaving it there for a long, extended period of time. Mine would be something that is deployed in certain situations, not all the time sitting out there. Someone said that the box will get hot in the sun with being so black. Yeah, so I was always planning to give it a camo paint job, and that also helps for keeping it low profile. And then people were already talking about how you need to mount it. That was the motivation for making the follow-up video. And then a lot of comments about, oh, why do this when you could just buy XYZ crossband repeater all in one package? And yeah, you could totally do that. I may link a few of the top suggestions below, but I guess my point in the video was that you can do this pretty easily if you already have some very common equipment like Baofeng radios. But I totally get wanting to spare the headache of tinkering with something trying to get it to work. I don't personally love radio stuff myself, so I like inexpensive, ready-to-go packages that just work. And this brings me to my soapbox moment. And I would bend over backwards not to be a radio channel or a comms channel. And it's mainly because of the community. I really hate to say it, but you know, the radio community can be even worse than the gun community at times when it comes to putting down other people's gear. And I don't know if it's just negativity bias where the worst 5% of negative people are the ones that are leaving comments. But it really gets to you as a content creator, and I don't like it. So I don't want to be a radio channel, and I look at other channels out there like the Tech Prepper. It's easy to get views and subscribers when you put out radio content, but they're a fickle bunch. Like he's got what? Over 100,000 something subscribers and only gets 2,000, 8,000 views on his videos, and I can tell that it's a really big drain on him. I do not want to be a radio or comms channel, even though I'm kind of the comms guy in our group. Most of y'all are great, supportive people, you know, the actual lovely, supportive, have good ideas, build each other up. And that's what ham radio is supposed to be about. You know, the old Elmers that were mentoring the next generation in technical radio knowledge to pass the torch. But what I'm seeing nowadays is the next generation doesn't even want to take that torch from the old hams for many different reasons. You've probably heard the term sad hams online, and that's used to describe the old grumps that are only going to tear you down, criticize you, gatekeep, all that kind of thing, rather than the mentoring, the helping, the encouraging that the old hams are supposed to be. So I have some advice for you old hams so that you don't fall into that accusation. The first thing to know about this coming generation of ham radio operators is that we tend to have different priorities than you did. And this is all overgeneralization, but we tend to prioritize privacy and quality of contacts over breadth and quantity of contacts. You know, we're more interested in ComSec and only communicating with the people in our own network, on our own team, rather than random contacts across the globe just so we can test our gear. Ooh. We don't take inordinate pride in our call signs either. We don't paste them all over our car, bumper stickers, and you know, email signatures and all that. You know, it's a way of doxing, so we don't blast it out there. We tend to be more interested in intel sharing and preparedness rather than social clubs or rag chewing. Again, these are all overgeneralizations, but we've always had emergency preparedness as a staple pillar of the ham radio community. I'm not saying that's not always been there, but it's definitely the focus nowadays. And the other thing I would say is we also tend to be more interested in low-cost mass adoption gear rather than tinkering and customization, hence the Baofeng, your Meshtastic devices, and hopefully someday an all-in-one HF solution that you can do long-distance texting on, so you don't have to, more streamlined than JS8 call, FTA, all that stuff. But this is one criticism that I would say is probably fair on our current generation, because if, to the extent that the next generation is not learning those fundamental principles, they're not going to be as resilient to adapt to different situations. I would like to see more tinkering and more innovation more broadly, rather than just a few innovators developing a product for the masses to consume. But all that said, apart from the differences, we still need that mentorship and guidance. Just try to recognize what is personal preference and what is the actual great technical skills and the know-how that we need to know, that needs to be passed down. And I would just encourage you to let your passion for trying things, for tinkering, and for that technical innovation be what drives you to engage, rather than a desire to put down or mock or your own self-aggrandizement. Anyway, soapbox over. So here are a couple action items for this video. Ask yourself, is all of this worth it for the marginally improved TRANSEC of having a non-co-located transmitter to your location? For a lot of people, this probably is going to be negative, but it's worth trying, because it's fun to have a new capability, to test stuff out, to be out in the field for a reason rather than just rucking or whatever. And 2, investigate alternatives to this. I just provided a way. A lot of people have other ways, including some of those off-the-shelf radios, all-in-one radios you could buy. And then 3, practice with teammates. Like I was saying earlier, we like to be making comms with people we know rather than random randos out there on the airwaves just rag chewing away about their gear, about what they had to eat, about what they did that day. That's not really what we're about. But get out there with your teammates, help train them up in the use of these radios if they are coming up behind you in terms of what does it do, what do the buttons do. Yeah, just help them out. And if we do that, we're going to be much more resilient. Mark my words. All right, that's all I had for you this time. On a personal note, I'm about to be a father. We're due any day now. So I might not have the bandwidth to do a video for maybe another month or so. So just hang tight, wait for the next CDE drop. You can hit the bell icon. And let me just say, nothing motivates you to be prepared for adversity than having a child. And any of you veteran fathers out there, I'm sure know what I'm talking about. So wish me well, pray for a safe delivery, and that's all I have for you. Charlie Delta Echo, out.